Hi there. Welcome to my weekly live stream. I try and do these once a week with some yoga tips and, something. I like to talk about things that are pertinent, that what's going on in the world right now. One of the things was a study that came out recently by a guy named Dr. Ibrahim Kira he's in Atlanta. He works in a trauma center in Atlanta. He's a scientist and a physician. And one of the things that he has been writing about is the collective trauma that we're experiencing right now. He's not the only person, there's lots of people, but I ran across this study today. And I'll probably blog about it this week. So please have an eye out for my blog. So what I want to talk about today is why trauma lives in the body. And this is particularly relevant in terms of what we're experiencing right now, which is a global pandemic, which is also for many people a global trauma. Now we have things like what just happened with the Hurricane Ida slamming New Orleans and Louisiana. Those are single incident traumas. Whenever like the earthquakes happen in Haiti or in Japan and there's tsunamis, like those are single incident traumas. Those are happening all the time everywhere in the world. Some cultures are better than others at dealing with trauma. Japanese culture tends to be very good at dealing with trauma. And part of that is like people get out and they sweep the streets and they clean up the mess. That doesn't mean individuals aren't suffering from trauma in that culture, but the culture has a different way of dealing with trauma. Now, when you have cultures that are more isolating and isolated, like the United States, for example, a very isolating culture, because we've had such a breakdown of so many of the social safety nets, as well as the institutions that bring people together, and that, we can trace that back to, and to a large part, to capitalism. But anyway, that's kind of a tangent. I will talk about why trauma lives in the body. These kinds of cultures that are isolating, people tend to struggle more with trauma, because one of the things that really supports trauma is community and community support. So you see, like, for example, you'll see folks in Africa living in really challenging situations, but still, the big smiles, and that's because the attachment and the community has been very solid. Now, I'm not saying that's the case everywhere in Africa, of course not. I'm not saying it's the United States is completely isolated. There's some wonderful communities in the United States. I'm talking more about trends that tend to follow cultures. There's a lot of research actually on cultures and trauma that's very interesting to get into. But what I want to talk about today in terms of this global trauma is, why does it sit in your body? Like, somebody asked me that, and we're like, why do we feel trauma in our body? What tends to happen to people is when you are experiencing a trauma, the mind and the brain, but the mind can't handle it. The mind can't handle it. And so it goes into the body. So somebody also asked me about denial. There's a lot of denial going on right now. There's no pandemic happening, or there's a pandemic happening, I don't care, I'm going to go out and do whatever I want to do anyway. That's huge, right? And why does that happen? That happens all the time in trauma, because again, we can't handle it. So we go into this like, nothing bad is happening, or there isn't this trauma happening, or I can't tolerate it, I can't process the trauma, and then it starts to live in the body. How does that manifest? So it may manifest as tension in the body. It may manifest as heartbreaking, heart-wrenching kind of feelings in the body. That's possible. I know that when many times when I've taught yoga and I've worked with people with trauma, like feeling anything below here is unacceptable, impossible. You can maybe feel the breath in your sinuses, but not anywhere in your lungs. Like that's a really common thing. And that unraveling trauma takes a long time. It is best done in the context of a therapeutic setting with licensed healthcare providers. That's so important to understand, which is why if you're thinking about thinking about the future, we are dealing with a highly traumatized population at the moment. Those people are going to need help. People say to me, oh, I want to become a yoga therapist. Great, become a yoga therapist, but become a psychotherapist first. or a school counselor first, or a nurse practitioner first. Do that so that you are working within a system so that you can provide services and it's sustainable and you can get reimbursement. Not everybody has to do that, of course, or needs to do that or wants to do that. It's fine if you want to do yoga therapy. I am all about the profession and promoting the profession. And at the same time, we're going to need to get these services to people in a more comprehensive or a faster way, if you like. And through the healthcare system is one way that's going to be happening. So you know, the thing is that we have to deal with these. We're going to have to deal with this trauma eventually. We're going to have to face the music and integrate the isolated neural networks that live below the level of consciousness. So I talked about what they might feel like. It might feel like these, you know, unpleasant feelings in the body. It also comes out behaviorally. So it might look like rage, or, you know, road rage, or anger, or depression, or anxiety, or ruminative thoughts that you can't stop, or OCD behaviors. Trauma manifests in all sorts of ways, or idiosyncratic weird things that, you know, all human beings do, but some of them are more self-destructive or destructive to others than others, right? The other thing that you'll see a lot in, you know, you always hear these stories about some guy came back from the war and started beating up his wife. And, you know, you hear that all the time, or started going to bars and beating up people in bars. And that's trauma that hasn't been integrated. So people need help right now. Yoga is a great support. It's not a substitute for it's no substitute, of course, for licensed professional care, but it can be very supportive for some people, especially when they're on the lighter end of the continuum of trauma. When people have, you know, dissociative trauma where they're, or, you know, not there, they lose time, they lose days. Like that is way out of scope of practice for yoga teachers and even yoga therapists. Okay, so that being said, why does it live in the body? It lives in the body because the mind can't tolerate it. So how do we integrate it? You got to bring the body into integrating. One of the things that's super helpful for integrating anything, and that's, I'm talking about more like they call it small T trauma. Like, you know, somebody cuts you off in traffic, or you have a small car accident, or you find out that somebody at work, you know, was doing something that undermined you or whatever. And, you know, you have these kind of like stressors essentially, and stress and trauma run on the same circuit. So one thing that's super helpful is contralateral movement, you know, opposite arm and leg sort of stuff. So walking is really great. Walking is very integrative for trauma, but also we can do lots of contralateral stuff in yoga practice. So like Warrior One, using one arm, opposite arm and leg is a great way to do contralateral movement, right? Opposite arm and leg, and you go over and over again. So you know how I teach, it's more, I call it subtle yoga. It's more in line with the Vinny yoga tradition. So we repeat things a lot. So that's one way. Opposite arm and leg, use that. Cross lateral is also good, going across the midline with anything. Eagle pose is a great example of that. So cross lateral, contralateral helps to integrate. It's one way. There's many. There's so much more to that. It's, you know, it usually takes me 4 days to unpack trauma, and I'm doing a little 10-minute talk here. So, but I hope this is like helpful in thinking about just like what we're dealing with right now, what you're going through, what your friends, neighbors, yoga students might be going through, and offer folks support that you can integrate trauma. We also need resources, right? So we need each other. We need safety in our homes. We need a house and, you know, roofs over our head. We need to feel connected to other people. All of that is really important during these challenging times. Hey, and, you know, join the Subtle Yoga community on Facebook. It's a great place to connect to other like-minded people. I would love to have you over there, and it's a great way to build community and find some support during these challenging times. So thank you for being here. Please leave a comment. It's nice to have you, and I'll see you next week. Take care.